narrative.
We were sitting in the living room, a room that had once felt warm and full of life, but now felt cold and distant. She looked at me not with anger or sadness, but with a detached indifference that caught me completely off guard. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, as she said, "I don't need you anymore. I'm better off alone." At first, I didn't process her words. It was like my brain was refusing to connect the dots. "What are you saying?" I asked, hoping I'd misunderstood, but her response left no room for doubt. "I want out. This marriage isn't working for me, and honestly, I've been thinking about this for a while." The words hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I tried to find some sign of hesitation or regret in her expression, but there was none. She didn't look angry or even particularly upset, just done. I couldn't help but wonder how long she'd been harboring this decision while I was completely oblivious. I tried to reason with her. "We've been together for years. We've built a life together. If something's wrong, we can work on it. You can't just throw it all away." My voice cracked, but I didn't care. I wasn't ready to lose everything we had. Her response was as icy as her demeanor. "That's just it. I don't want to work on it. I've already made up my mind. I need to focus on myself now." She stood up and started walking towards the bedroom, leaving me sitting there, stunned. It was the most surreal moment of my life. This was the woman I'd loved, trusted, and shared everything with. And now she was telling me that I was no longer part of her plan. The days that followed were a blur. She was methodical about everything, packing her things, dividing up belongings, and even drafting an email to confirm the split like it was a business transaction. There wasn't a single ounce of emotion from her side. It felt like I was grieving the loss of someone who was still alive. And worse, she didn't seem to care. The night she left for good was eerily quiet. She didn't even say goodbye, just a simple "take care" as she walked out the door with her bags. I sat there in the silence of our now empty apartment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I replayed every moment, every conversation, wondering what I'd missed. How had I not seen this coming? Was it something I'd done or not done? That first night alone was brutal. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. All I could do was sit there, consumed by a mix of anger, confusion, and sadness. It felt like my entire world had collapsed in an instant. But in hindsight, that night was the beginning of something much bigger, something I couldn't have predicted at the time. The days after she left were unbearable at first. The silence in the apartment was oppressive, the kind that made every little sound, like the creak of a floorboard or the hum of the refrigerator, feel deafening. But as much as I was drowning in my own grief, something in me told me to stay curious, to figure out how she was adjusting to this better-off-alone life she had been so adamant about. That curiosity, though, turned into something else entirely. It started with a notification on my phone. I hadn't unfollowed her on social media yet. I wasn't ready for that step. She had posted a picture, a wide smile, a glass of wine in her hand, surrounded by friends at what looked like a rooftop bar. The caption read, "Here's to new beginnings." People were quick to comment, showering her with support and compliments about her newfound freedom. It felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Over the next few days, more posts followed. She was out and about, living a life that seemed tailor-made to scream, "Look how amazing I'm doing without you." Fancy brunches, weekend getaways, yoga sessions, and even a picture of her with a group of people I'd never seen before, laughing and carefree. If her goal was to paint a picture of a flawless new chapter, she was succeeding. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. While she was flaunting her freedom, I was left trying to piece my life back together, haunted by the what-ifs and whys. But something about the sheer perfection of her posts didn't sit right with me. It was too polished, too calculated. This wasn't the woman I had been married to for years. She hated yoga, and the rooftop bars she was frequenting were the same ones she used to call pretentious. None of it felt real. Then I started hearing things. A mutual friend reached out, hesitant but concerned. "Hey, I don't mean to pry," they began, "but is she okay? She's been going out a lot, like every night. It just seems off." That was the first crack in the image she'd been projecting. It wasn't just me who noticed. Something wasn't adding up. And then there was the story about the new crowd she was hanging out with. From what I could gather, they weren't exactly supportive influences. Parties that lasted until the early hours of the morning, questionable relationships, and a sense that she was trying too hard to prove something to herself, or maybe to me. What struck me most, though, wasn't just her newfound social butterfly persona. It was the contrast between us. While she was out trying to plaster over whatever void she was feeling, I was here slowly finding clarity in the quiet. Sure, I wasn't living some Instagram-worthy life, but there was something honest about my pain. It was raw, but it was real. The turning point came when someone sent me a photo from one of her nights out. She wasn't posing or smiling for the camera this time. Instead, she looked lost, staring off into the distance, her drink untouched. For a moment, I felt pity, but that pity quickly gave way to a realization. Her new life wasn't about thriving. It was about running. From what I didn't know yet, but it wasn't freedom she had found. It was avoidance. The irony was hard to miss. She had left, claiming she was better off without me, but everything about her actions screamed the opposite. While she was spiraling into a whirlwind of distractions, I found myself taking the first tentative steps toward rebuilding my life, quietly but steadily. For the first time, I began to see the cracks in her facade, and maybe, just maybe, the strength in my own. The picture of her staring into the distance at that party stuck with me. It wasn't just the image itself, it was what it represented. The carefully curated life she had been showcasing was starting to unravel, even if only in small, fleeting moments. And while I wasn't actively trying to investigate her life, pieces of the puzzle began falling into my lap, painting a very different picture than the one she'd been posting online. It started innocently enough. A coworker who had seen us together countless times at company events casually asked about her during a coffee break. "How's she doing? I saw her the other night at that new place downtown. She didn't look too great." I tried to keep my response neutral, something vague about how we were no longer together. Still, the coworker's words lingered. This wasn't the first time someone had mentioned seeing her out, and the stories all seemed to follow a pattern. Late nights, excessive drinking, and a visible exhaustion that no filter could hide. Then came the message. It was from one of her old friends, someone she had been close with for years, but had seemingly distanced herself from recently. "Hey, I don't mean to overstep," it began, "but I'm worried about her. She's been acting strange, and I thought you should know." Attached was a screenshot of a text exchange they'd had. In it, my ex-wife admitted that she was struggling more than she let on. She talked about feeling isolated and unsure if she had made the right decisions. Reading those words brought a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated, proof that her freedom wasn't the triumph she wanted everyone to believe. But another part of me felt an unexpected sadness. Despite everything, I didn't want her to be unhappy. I just wished she'd been honest about it instead of pretending to be untouchable. The more I learned, the clearer the picture became. It wasn't just about her newfound social life. Financially, she was struggling. She had underestimated how expensive it would be to maintain the lifestyle she was portraying. Nights out, designer clothes, and trips weren't cheap, especially when she no longer had the financial stability we'd built together. And then there was the matter of her new crowd. Mutual friends who had stayed in touch with her mentioned the growing tension within her circle. These weren't lifelong friends or people who truly cared about her. They were acquaintances, fickle and opportunistic. One friend even told me about a night where she was left stranded after a petty argument, forced to call an Uber at 2 a.m. That wasn't the kind of independence she'd claimed to want. What really hit home, though, was a conversation I had with a mutual friend over coffee. "I don't think she knows who she is right now," they said. "She's trying so hard to be someone else, someone she thinks she should be, and it's not working." That comment struck a nerve. It explained so much of what I'd been observing. She wasn't just trying to prove something to the world. She was trying to prove something to herself. But while her life seemed to spiral, mine had started to shift in the opposite direction. I wasn't chasing distractions or trying to mask my pain. I was facing it, and in doing so, I was beginning to rebuild. Little by little, I started reclaiming my confidence. I went back to the gym, focused on work, and even started reconnecting with old friends, people who genuinely cared about me. I wasn't plastering my progress all over social media, but I was making it, and that was enough. As more truths about her situation emerged, I began to feel something unexpected. Clarity. The life she left behind wasn't the problem, it was her inability to confront her own unhappiness. And for the first time, I realized that maybe I wasn't the one who needed to change. It didn't take long before the cracks in her carefully crafted life widened into full-blown fractures. The stories I'd been hearing, the late nights, the financial strain, the shallow friendships, were only the tip of the iceberg. Her attempt to build a new, better version of herself had been crumbling for weeks, but now it was impossible to ignore. One day, a message from a mutual friend landed in my inbox. It was blunt. "You're not going to believe what just happened." According to them, she'd shown up at a party, dressed to the nines, of course, as if clinging to the facade, but things had gone south fast. She got into an argument with someone in her new social circle, a guy she had been seeing casually. The details were hazy, but apparently he had made some unkind remark about her behavior, calling her out in front of everyone. Instead of fighting back, she broke down in tears and left the party humiliated. That was the moment when people around her started to see what I'd been seeing all along. The confidence she exuded was paper thin. It was all performance. And now the performance was falling apart in public. I'd like to say that hearing this brought me satisfaction, but it didn't. If anything, I felt a strange mix of pity and relief. Pity because no one deserves to hit rock bottom that way, and relief because it reinforced a truth I'd been slowly coming to terms with. I couldn't have saved her from this, no matter how hard I tried. This collapse was hers to navigate, not mine to fix. The fallout from that night wasn't contained to just her social life. Her finances were in even worse shape than I'd realized. Mutual friends told me she'd had to move out of the apartment she'd rented after leaving me. She'd been struggling to keep up with rent and the lifestyle she thought she needed to maintain, and when it became too much, she had no choice but to downsize. A smaller place, fewer luxuries, fewer distractions, and yet even then it seemed like she was still trying to cling to some version of her new identity. She stopped posting on social media as much, but when she did, the captions took on a defensive tone, almost as if she was trying to convince herself that everything was still fine. "Sometimes, life just challenges you to grow," one post read, accompanied by a photo of an empty coffee cup and a journal. But the comments were fewer now, and the likes came mostly from strangers or distant acquaintances. The crowd she'd once relied on had clearly moved on. It was in those quieter moments, when the noise of her curated life faded, that I realized she wasn't thriving. She was surviving. And it struck me how different our paths had become. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving in a way I hadn't anticipated. My career was taking off. My friendships were deepening, and I had even started to feel excited about the future again. I wasn't flaunting it, but I was living it. The most telling moment came when a mutual friend accidentally let something slip. "She told me she regrets leaving," they said. "She thought she'd find freedom, but all she found was emptiness." Those words stuck with me, not because I wanted her back, but because they confirmed something I'd suspected for a while. She wasn't just mourning the life she'd left behind. She was mourning the realization that the freedom she craved had been an illusion all along. By now, her world was a shadow of what she tried to make it seem. The friends, the parties, the lifestyle, it had all been temporary, a distraction from something deeper. And while she was still trying to pick up the pieces, I was finally moving forward without looking back. I was at work when I got the text. A simple, "Can we talk?" popped up on my phone, and her name flashed on the screen for the first time in weeks. My initial reaction wasn't anger or excitement, it was curiosity. What could she possibly have to say? After all the chaos and self-destruction, what was left to discuss? Still, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. A small part of me wanted to hear her out, if only to see what she thought she could salvage from the mess she had created. We met at a quiet cafe near my office, a place we had gone to a few times during our marriage. She was already seated when I arrived, nervously stirring a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. When she looked up and saw me, her face was a mixture of relief and hesitation, like she wasn't sure if I'd even show up. She looked different, tired, maybe even fragile. The confident, carefree persona she'd been parading around was completely gone. "I'm sorry," she started, before I could even sit down. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I need to say this." I gestured for her to continue, sitting down across from her with a neutral expression. I wasn't about to make this easy for her. She began pouring her heart out, a rambling mixture of apologies and explanations. She admitted that she had underestimated how much she'd relied on me, not just financially, but emotionally. "I thought I needed to be on my own to find myself," she said, her voice cracking, "but all I found was how much I threw away." She went on to talk about how hard the past few weeks had been, how the friends she'd leaned on had disappeared, how the lifestyle she'd tried to maintain had drained her completely, and how she'd spent many nights alone, wondering where it all went wrong. She admitted that she'd been wrong to think leaving me would fix her unhappiness. "It wasn't you," she said quietly. "It was me." As she spoke, I felt no urge to interrupt. I just listened. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction, to revel in her regret, but instead I felt nothing. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad either. I had moved past all that. Her words, while heartfelt, weren't changing anything for me. They were too little, too late. And then came the part I knew was coming. "I want us to try again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to fix what I broke. Please." She reached across the table, as if to take my hand, but I pulled back. "I can't," I said simply. She froze, her face falling. "You're sorry now, and I believe you mean it, but I've spent the last few months rebuilding my life, and I've realized something. I'm better off without you." The words felt like they should hurt her, but instead they seemed to land with a strange sort of acceptance. She nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. I had to try." We sat there for a few moments in silence before I stood up to leave. "Take care of yourself," I said, and walked out the door. As I stepped outside, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't satisfying in the way I might have imagined it weeks ago, but it was freeing. I had given her a chance to speak, and I had made my decision. What struck me most as I walked back to my office was how much lighter I felt. The weight of her leaving, the confusion and anger, it was all gone. I wasn't tied to her anymore. Not in anger, not in love, and not in regret. I was free to focus on the life I was building. A life that no longer had room for someone who didn't see my worth when it mattered. And that, I realized, was the best thing I could have hoped for. As I walked away from that cafe, I didn't look back. The weight of that encounter didn't linger. Instead, it left me with a clarity I hadn't expected. For the first time in what felt like ages, I felt fully in control of my life. The chapter with her was closed, and there was no bitterness in that realization, just a calm sense of finality. I wasn't angry anymore, and I certainly wasn't sad. I had simply outgrown her, and the life I had built without her was proof of that. That evening, I found myself reflecting on everything I'd been through since she left. The pain, the confusion, the nights spent wondering where I'd gone wrong. All of it had been necessary, as much as it had hurt. It had forced me to take a hard look at myself, to rebuild not just my routine but my confidence, my sense of self. And in doing so, I discovered something incredible. I was capable of so much more than I'd given myself credit for. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed energy. I had an important presentation at work, one I'd been preparing for weeks, and it went better than I could have imagined. My boss pulled me aside afterward, hinting at a potential promotion in the near future. It wasn't just the professional success, though. It was the way I felt while giving that presentation. Confident, capable, like I was finally the version of myself I'd always wanted to be. Later that day, I got a text from her, just a simple, "Thank you for listening." I didn't reply. There wasn't anything left to say, and engaging further would only tether me to a past I'd already left behind. Instead, I turned my attention to something, or rather, someone, who had been a bright spot in my life lately. There was a woman I'd been getting to know at work, someone younger and full of energy, with a sharp wit and a kindness that felt refreshing. She wasn't someone I'd expected to cross paths with, let alone consider dating. But our conversations had become the highlight of my days. That evening, we had plans for dinner, and for the first time in years, I felt excited about the possibility of what could come next. As I got ready for our date, I took one last look in the mirror. The man staring back at me wasn't the same one who had begged his wife to reconsider walking out the door. He wasn't the man who had spent sleepless nights scrolling through her social media, trying to make sense of her new life. That man was gone, and in his place stood someone stronger, more grounded, and, most importantly, happier. Dinner that night was effortless. We laughed, talked about everything from work to travel, and for a moment, it struck me how different this felt. There were no shadows of the past hanging over me, no comparison to what had come before. This was new, fresh, and entirely on my terms. When I got home, I couldn't help but think about how far I'd come in just a few months. The version of me who had sat in that silent, empty apartment after she left would never have believed it. But now, as I looked around at the home I'd made for myself, a space that felt like mine, full of things that brought me joy, I couldn't help but smile. She had been right about one thing, I realized. I was better off alone, but not in the way she had imagined. I wasn't wallowing in loneliness or bitterness. I was thriving, building a life I was proud of, and connecting with people who truly valued me. I didn't regret meeting her, nor did I regret letting her go. In the end, her leaving had been the best thing that ever happened to me because it gave me the chance to find myself again, and maybe someone even better. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.